The Hiding Place. Chapter 8. Storm Clouds Gather. For a year and a half now we had gotten away with our double lives. While we were still an elderly watchmaker living with his 2 daughters above his tiny shop, the beach was the center of an underground ring that spread now to the farthest corners of Holland. Here daily came dozens of workers, reports, appeals. Sooner or later we were going to make a mistake. I especially worried at mealtimes. The dining room was only 5 steps above street level. A tall passerby could see right in the window. We had hung a white curtain across it, providing a kind of screen while letting in light. Still, only when the heavy blackout shades were drawn at night did I feel truly private. At lunch one day, looking through the thin curtain, I thought I saw a figure standing in the alley. There was no reason for anyone to linger there. I parted the curtain an inch. Standing there, seemingly immobilized, was old Katrine from Nollie's house. I bolted down the stairs and pulled her inside. The old lady's hands were cold as ice. "Katrine, what are you doing here?" "She's gone mad," she sobbed. "Your sister's gone mad." "What happened?" "They came," she said. "The SD. Your sister and Annalise were in the living room and I heard her." "Heard what?" I nearly screamed. "They pointed at Annalise and said, 'Is this a Jew?' Your sister said yes." I felt my knees go weak. Young, blonde Annalise with the perfect papers. She had trusted us. Oh, Nollie, what had your rigid honesty done? I left Katrine in the dining room, wheeled my bicycle down the stairs, and bumped as fast as I could the 1.5 to Nollie Street. At the corner, I leaned my bike against a lamppost and caught my breath. Then, as casually as I was able, I strolled up the sidewalk toward the house. Except for a car parked at the street curb directly in front, everything looked deceptively normal. I walked past. Not a sound from behind the white curtains. When I got to the corner, I turned around. At that moment the door opened and Nollie came out. Behind her walked a man in a brown business suit. A minute later a second man appeared, half supporting Annalise. The young woman's face was white as chalk. I thought she would faint. The car doors slammed, the motor roared, and they were gone. I pedaled back to the beach fighting tears. Nollie, we soon learned, was taken to the police station to one of the cells and back. But Annalise had been sent to Amsterdam, from which Jews were transported to concentration camps in Germany and Poland. It was little Meech, whose offer of help I had discounted, who kept us in touch with Nollie. She was in wonderful spirits, Meech said, singing hymns and songs in her sweet soprano. Meech delivered bread that Betsy baked for Nollie each morning and the blue sweater Nollie asked for. Meech relayed another message from Nollie, one especially for me. No ill will happen to Annalise. God will not let them take her to Germany. He will not let her suffer because I obeyed him. 6 days after Nollie's arrest, the telephone rang. Pickwick's voice was on the other end. "I wonder, my dear, if I could trouble you to deliver that watch yourself?" A message, then, that he could not relay over the phone. I biked at once out to Erdenhout, taking along a man's watch for safe measure. Pickwick waited until we were in the drawing room with the door shut. Last night in Amsterdam, 40 Jews were rescued. One of them was most insistent that Nollie know, Annalise is free. Do you understand this message? I nodded, too overcome with relief and joy to speak. Had Nollie been so sure? After 10 days in the Haarlem jail, Nollie was transferred to the prison in Amsterdam. Pickwick said that the German doctor in charge of the prison hospital occasionally arranged a medical discharge. I went at once to Amsterdam to see him. But what could I say, I wondered, as I waited in the entrance hall of his home. How could I get into the good graces of this man? Lolling about the foyer, sniffing from time to time at my legs and hands, were 3 huge Doberman pinschers. I remembered the book we were reading aloud by Bicycle Lamp, How to Win Friends and Influence People. One of the techniques advocated was to find the man's hobby. Hobby dogs. I wonder. At last the maid returned and showed me into a small sitting room. "How smart of you, doctor," I said in German to the grizzle-haired man on the sofa, "to have these lovely dogs with you. They must be good company when you must be away from your family." The doctor's face brightened. "You like dogs?" For perhaps 10 minutes, while I racked my brain for everything I had ever heard or read on the subject, we talked about dogs. Then abruptly the doctor stood up. "But I'm sure you haven't come here to talk about dogs." I met his eyes. "I have a sister in prison here in Amsterdam. I don't think she's well." The doctor smiled. "So you aren't interested in dogs?" "I'm interested now," I said, smiling too. "But I am more interested in my sister." "What's her name?" "Nollie van Worden." The doctor went out of the room and came back with a brown notebook. "Yes, one of the recent arrivals. Tell me something about her. What is she in prison for?" Taking a chance, I told the doctor that Nollie's crime had been hiding a Jew. I also told him that she was the mother of 6 children who, if left without aid, could become a burden to the state. I did not mention that the youngest of these children was now 17. "Well, we'll see." He walked to the door. "You must excuse me now." Days, then a week, then 2 weeks passed and there was no further news. I went back to Amsterdam. "I've come to see how those Dobermans are," I told the doctor. He was not amused. "I know that you have not come to talk about dogs. You must give me time." There was nothing to do but wait. On a bright September noon, 17 of us were squeezed around the dining room table. All of a sudden Nils, one of our workers and seated across from me, turned pale. Nils spoke in a low, normal voice. "Do not turn around. Someone is looking over the curtain." But that was impossible. He would have to be 10 feet high. "He's on a ladder, washing the window," Nils said. Whoever it was, we must not sit here in this frozen, guilty silence. Yuzi had an inspiration. "Happy birthday to you," he sang. We all joined in. "Happy birthday, dear Opa." The song was still echoing through the beach when I went out the side door and stood next to the ladder, looking up at the man holding bucket and sponge. "What are you doing?" "We didn't want the windows washed. Especially not during the party." The man took a piece of paper from his pocket and consulted it. "Isn't this Kuipers? They're across the street. Please come in and help us celebrate." The man thanked me, but he had work to do. I watched him cross the Barteldrastraat with his ladder to Kuipers. When I got back to the dining room, they asked, "Do you think he was spying?" I did not answer. I did not know. One of my biggest unknowns was my own performance under questioning. As long as I was awake, I felt fairly sure of myself. But if they should come at night? Over and over the group worked with me, Nils, Henk, Lendert, bursting into my room without warning, shaking me awake, hurling questions at me. The first time it happened, I was sure the real raid had come. There was a terrific pounding on my door, then the beam of a flashlight in my eyes. "Get up! On your feet!" I could not see the man who was speaking. "Where are you hiding your 9 Jews?" "We only have 6 Jews now." There was an awful silence. The room light came on to show Rolf clutching his head with his hands. "Oh, no," he said. "It can't be that bad." "Think now," said Henk. "The Gestapo is trying to trap you." The answer is, what Jews? We don't have Jews here. They tried again a few nights later. "The Jews you're hiding, where do they come from?" I sat up groggily. "I don't know. They just come to the door." Rolf flung his hat to the floor. "No, no, no," he shouted. "What Jews? There are no Jews. Can't you learn?" "I'll learn," I promised. "I'll do better." And sure enough, the next time I woke a little more completely. Half a dozen shadowy forms filled the room. "Where do you hide the ration cards?" a voice demanded. "Under the bottom stair, of course." But this time I would not be trapped into saying so. A crafty reply occurred to me, in the Frisian clock on the stairwell. Kik sat down beside me and put an arm around me. "That was better, Taunt Corrie," he said. "But remember, you have no cards except the 3 for you, Opa, and Taunt Betsy." With repeated drills, I got better. But I worried. When they were real Gestapo agents trained in getting the truth from people, how would I perform? We were sitting around the supper table after curfew one night, 3 10 booms, the 7 permanent guests, and 2 Jews for whom we were seeking homes, when the shop doorbell chimed. Someone bold enough to stand there after curfew? Taking the keys from my pocket, I hurried down to the hall, unlocked the workshop door, and felt my way through the dark store. At the front door, I listened a moment. "Who's there?" I called. "Do you remember me?" A man speaking German. "Who is it?" I asked in the same language. "An old friend." "Open the door." I fumbled with the lock and drew the door gingerly back. It was a German soldier in uniform. Before I could reach the alarm button behind the door, he had pushed his way inside. He took off his hat, and I recognized the young German watchmaker whom father had discharged 4 years ago. "Otto," I cried. "Captain Altschuler," he corrected me. I said nothing. He looked around the shop. "Same stuffy little place," he said. He reached for the wall switch, but I put my hand over it. "No, we don't have blackout shades in the shop." "Well, let's go upstairs where we can talk over old times. Your father's still alive." I edged my way to the sales counter where another bell was located. "Father is well, thank you. Aren't you going to invite me up to pay my respects?" Why was he so eager to go upstairs? My finger found the button. What was that? Otto whirled around. What was what? That sound. I heard a kind of buzzing. Otto started back through the workshop. "Wait," I shouted. "Let me get the front door locked and I'll go up with you. I want to see how long it takes them to recognize you." I dawdled at the door as long as I dared. His suspicions were aroused. I followed him into the hall. Not a sound from the dining room or the stairs. I dashed past him up the steps and rapped on the door. "Father, Betsy," I cried in what I hoped was a playful voice. "I'll give you 3 guesses who's standing here." "No guessing games." Otto reached past me and flung open the door. Father and Betsy looked up from their meal. The table was set for 3, my unfinished plate on the other side. It was so perfect that even I, who had just seen 12 people eating here, could scarcely believe this was anything but an innocent old man dining with his daughters. The Alpina sign stood on the sideboard. They had remembered everything. Otto pulled out a chair. "Well," he crowed, "things happened just like I said, didn't they?" "So it would seem," said Father mildly. Otto lingered around 15 minutes. Then, feeling perhaps that he had underlined his victory sufficiently, he sauntered out into the empty streets. It was only after another half-hour that we dared give the all-clear to 9 cramped and shaky people. The second week in October, the secret telephone number rang in the hall. I hurried to pick it up. Only Father, Betsy, or I answered it. "Aren't you coming to pick me up?" It was Nollie. "Nollie, where are you?" "At the train station in Amsterdam." "Stay right there." I biked to Nollie's house and then, with Flip and the children, hurried to the Haarlem station. We saw Nollie in Amsterdam in her bright blue sweater even before our train came to a stop. 7 weeks in prison had left her pale, but as radiantly Nollie as ever. A prison doctor, she said, had pronounced her low blood pressure a serious condition, one that might leave her disabled and her 6 children a burden to society. Her face wrinkled in puzzlement as she said it. Christmas of 1943 was approaching. At the beach, we had not only Christmas to celebrate but also Hanukkah, the Jewish festival of lights. Betsy found a Hanukkah candle stand among the treasures stored with us behind the dining room cupboard and set it on the upright piano. Each night we lit 1 more candle, and then we would sing. About the 5th night, as we were gathered round the piano, the doorbell in the alley rang. I opened it to find the wife of the optician next door, her plump face twisted with anxiety. "Do you think," she whispered, "your Jews could sing a little more softly? We can hear them, and well, there are all kinds of people on the street." Back in Tante Jan's rooms, we considered this news in consternation. If our neighbors knew about our affairs, how many other people in Haarlem did? It was not long before we discovered that one was the chief of police himself. One dark January morning, Toos burst into Tante Jan's rear room clutching a letter in her hand. The envelope bore the seal of the Haarlem police. I tore it open. Inside, on the police chief's stationery, was a handwritten note. "You will come to my office this afternoon at 3 o'clock." For 20 minutes we tried to analyze that note. Some felt it was not a prelude to arrest. Still, it was safest to prepare for search and imprisonment. Workers slipped out of the house, one at a time. Boarders emptied waste baskets and picked up scraps of sewing in preparation for a quick flight to the secret room. I burned incriminating papers in the coal hearth in the dining room. Then I took a bath and packed a prison bag according to what Nollie and others had learned: a Bible, a pencil, needle and thread, soap, toothbrush, and comb. I dressed in my warmest clothes with a second sweater beneath the top one. Then I hugged Father and Betsy tight and walked to the police station. The policeman on duty looked at the letter. "This way," he said. He knocked at the door marked Chief. The man who sat behind the desk had red-gray hair combed over a bald spot. A radio was playing. The chief reached over and twisted the volume knob up. "Miss Ten Boom," he said. "Welcome." "How do you do, sir?" The chief had left his desk to shut the door behind me. "Do sit down," he said. "I know all about you, you know. About your work." "The watchmaking, you mean?" "No." The chief lowered his voice. "I am talking about another work, and I want you to know that some of us here are in sympathy." The chief was smiling broadly now. Tentatively, I smiled back. "Now, Miss Ten Boom," he went on, "I have a request." He dropped his voice. He was, he said, working with the underground himself. But an informer in the police department was leaking information to the Gestapo. There's no way for us to deal with this man but to kill him. A shudder went down my spine. The chief went on in a whisper. "If he remains at large, many others will die. That is why I wondered, Miss Ten Boom, if in your work you might know of someone who could." "Kill him?" "Yes." I leaned back. Was this a trap? "Sir," I said at last, "I have always believed that it was my role to save life, not destroy it. I understand your dilemma, however, and I have a suggestion. Are you a praying man? Aren't we all, these days? Then let us pray together now that God will reach the heart of this man so that he does not continue to betray his countrymen." There was a long pause. Then the chief nodded. "That I would very much like to do." There in the heart of the police station, with the radio blaring out the latest news of the German advance, we prayed. We prayed that this Dutchman would come to realize his worth in the sight of God and the worth of every other human being on earth. At the end of the prayer, the chief stood up. "Thank you, Miss Ten Boom." He shook my hand. "I know now that it was wrong to ask you." Still clutching my prison bag, I walked home. I did not tell Father and Betsy that we had been asked to kill. The episode with the chief of police should have been encouraging in that apparently we had friends in high places. But the news had the opposite effect. All of Haarlem seemed to know what we were up to. How could we stop? We had to go on, but we knew that disaster could not be long in coming. It came first to Jop, the apprentice who had sought a safe home at the beach. Late one afternoon near the end of January 1944, Rolf stepped into the workshop. He glanced at Jop. I nodded. Jop was party to everything that went on in the house. "There's an underground home in Eid that is going to be raided this evening. Do you have anyone who can go?" I did not. "I'll go," Jop said. I opened my mouth to protest that he was inexperienced. Then I thought of the unsuspecting people at Eid. We had a wardrobe of girl scarves and dresses upstairs. Then quickly, "Boy," Rolf said. "You must leave immediately." He gave Jop the details and hurried away. In a few moments Jop reappeared, making a very pretty brunette in long coat and kerchief. To my astonishment, he turned at the door and kissed me. Jop was supposed to be back by the 7 p.m. curfew. 7 came and went. Perhaps he had been delayed and would return in the morning. Early the next day, I knew the minute Rolf stepped through the door that bad news was weighing him down. "It's Jop, isn't it?" Yes. Rolf learned the story from the sergeant at the night desk. When Jop got to the address in Eid, the Gestapo was already there. Jop had rung the bell. The door opened. Pretending to be the owner of the house, the SD man had invited Jop in. "And Corrie," Rolf said, "we must face it. The Gestapo will get information out of Jop." That night, Father and Betsy and I prayed long after the others had gone to bed. We knew that in spite of daily mounting risks, we had no choice but to move forward. This was evil's hour. We could not run away from it. Perhaps only when human effort had done its best and failed would God's power alone be free to work.